You've been scanned, not by some algorithm, not by some artificial intelligence, but by a civilization that can read consciousness the way you scan a barcode. The Arcturians. And this isn't some esoteric concept. This isn't a metaphor. This is a measurable interaction between two different frequency levels of reality. This video didn't randomly appear in front of you. You didn't find it. It found you. Because your energy field has crossed a certain threshold in the last few weeks. A threshold that only 1% of humanity ever reaches. And now you've become visible to those who have always been watching. But here's the question that's probably haunting you right now. What did they see? What's in your energy field that caught their attention? And more importantly, why now? The answer to these questions will change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Because what the Arcturians see in you, you haven't recognized yet. It's a capacity, a potential, a mission that's coded in your DNA and can only be activated now. But before we get there, let me tell you something. If you've felt watched in the last few days or weeks, if you've woken up at night with the knowing that something or someone wants your attention, if you've experienced synchronicities so precise they can no longer pass as coincidence, if numbers have been following you, if dreams were too vivid, too real to be just dreams, that wasn't coincidence, that was the scan. And here's the crazy part. You felt it without knowing what it was. Let me explain how this works. The Arcturians don't operate in three-dimensional reality like we do. They exist on a frequency level that we could call the fifth dimension. But even that's an inadequate description. They are beings of pure, coherent consciousness. No bodies in the physical sense. No spaceships like in science fiction movies, but organized information fields that can move through certain frequency ranges. And they've developed a technology that can scan consciousness fields, not your thoughts, not your emotions, but the fundamental signature of your energy field, the way your cells communicate with each other, the coherence between your heart and your brain, the specific frequency you radiate when nobody's watching and you're simply existing. It's like a fingerprint, just not physical, but energetic, and everything is encoded in this fingerprint. Your past lives, your soul contracts, your mission in this incarnation. Everything you ever were and ever will be is stored in this field. The Arcturians don't scan randomly. They're looking for something specific, for a specific frequency signature. A signature that indicates a consciousness is ready for the next step. Ready for an upgrade. Ready to break out of the matrix of collective hypnosis and assume the role it came here for. You might be wondering now, why me? Why was I specifically scanned? The answer is simple and complex at the same time. You weren't randomly selected. You selected yourself. Long before you incarnated into this body, you signed a contract, a soul contract. And in that contract it says that you want to be activated at a certain point, that you want to receive a signal when the time has come. That moment is now. But here's the problem. Most people who get scanned ignore the signal. They rationalize it away. They call it fear, stress, exhaustion, imagination. They go to the doctor, get some pills, and numb the signal that could change their entire life. Maybe you've tried exactly that. Maybe you've tried to get rid of this feeling that's been following you for weeks. This feeling that something big is coming, that your life will change fundamentally, that the reality you've been living in is only a fraction of what's possible. And maybe you haven't told anyone about it, because you know exactly what would happen. The looks, the concerned questions, the well-meaning advice to see a therapist, the subtle message, you're losing touch with reality. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if you're just beginning to make contact with actual reality? Let me tell you about the moment when I first understood what this scan really means. It wasn't in a meditation. It wasn't in a spiritual workshop. It was in a completely mundane moment. I was standing in my office. In front of me was a contract, a lucrative offer, a position that 100 other people would have given their right hand for. And something inside me said no, not loudly, not dramatically, but as a quiet, unshakable certainty deep in my solar plexus. A knowing that had nothing to do with logic. My mind couldn't find a single rational reason to reject this offer. But my body knew. My energy field knew. I declined. Everyone around me thought I'd gone crazy. My family, my friends, even I doubted myself. Had I just thrown away the biggest chance of my life? 3 months later, the company went bankrupt. Scandals, fraud, complete collapse. The people who had signed there suddenly found themselves without a job, with a ruined reputation, and legal problems. I had been spared, but not by luck, but because I had listened to a signal I hadn't even consciously received. It was only years later that I understood what had really happened in that moment. I had been scanned. My energy field had received information, a warning, a reroute. And because I had reached a certain frequency threshold at that point, I could receive and understand this signal, even though I couldn't grasp it rationally. That's the function of the Arcturian scan. It's not an invasion. It's not manipulation. It's a transmission of information, an activation of potentials that are already present within you. A wake-up call at a level deeper than your mind could ever reach. And the Arcturians know this. They know that the mind is the slowest form of intelligence, that it will always try to force the new, the unknown, the uncontrollable into old categories. That's why they don't communicate with your mind. They communicate with your field, with the intelligence of your cells, with the knowledge stored in your DNA. Quantum physicists have discovered something fascinating. Information transfer doesn't just work through mechanical signals. There's a form of communication that's instantaneous, that takes no time, that works across any distance. They call it quantum entanglement. Two particles that were once connected stay connected no matter how far apart they are. When you change one particle, the other changes at the same moment, not through a signal traveling through space, but through a connection that exists outside of space and time. That's exactly how the Arcturian scan works. Your consciousness field is entangled with their field, not because they're manipulating you, but because on a fundamental level, you consist of the same field they do. You're not a separate individual in an empty universe. You're a wave in an infinite ocean of consciousness, and the Arcturians are another wave in the same ocean. When your field reaches a certain coherence, radiates a certain frequency, that entanglement becomes active. Then the information exchange begins, not as words, not as images, but as direct transmission of knowledge, of activation codes, of memories that aren't memories, but recognitions of what you always were. Maybe you know these moments. You're sitting in complete silence. Nothing special is happening. And suddenly, you know something. Just like that. Without anyone telling you. Without having read it. You just know it, and this knowledge is so clear, so unshakable, that it feels like a memory, like something you always knew but had forgotten. That's not coincidence. That's the transmission. That's the moment when information flows from the field into your consciousness. The Arcturians call this a download, but the word is inadequate. It's more like opening a door that was always there. You're not going anywhere. You're coming home. But here's the crucial point. This download only happens when your field is ready to receive it, when your system has reached the necessary coherence. And coherence doesn't mean that you can meditate perfectly, or that you've eliminated all negative thoughts. Coherence means that your heart and brain start to oscillate in the same rhythm, that your cells stop working against each other and start functioning as a single orchestrated system. Researchers have measured that the human heart generates an electromagnetic field that's 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain. This field extends several feet beyond your body, and when this field is coherent, when it oscillates in a harmonic rhythm, then it doesn't just change your own body, it also changes the fields around you. Other people feel it, animals feel it, and consciousness forms that operate on higher frequencies see it like a beacon in the darkness. That's the reason you were scanned. Your field has started to glow, not figuratively speaking, but literally, on a frequency that's invisible to three-dimensional eyes, but crystal clear to interdimensional perception. And now you're probably wondering, what happens next? What do I do with this information? Most people who arrive at this point make one of two mistakes. Either they ignore it completely and fall back into their old patterns, or they over-dramatize it and start chasing signs, seeking confirmation, looking for someone to tell them they're not crazy. Both are a trap, because the signal you received doesn't require a dramatic reaction. It requires integration. It requires that you continue living your life, but with a new awareness, with the recognition that you're not just a biological organism that happens to exist on a planet, but that you're a multidimensional being playing a very specific role in a much larger process. The Arcturians see in you a capacity that you haven't activated yet, an ability to hold frequencies that would put most people into fear or chaos, an ability to function as an anchor, as a transmitter, as a bridge between dimensions. That sounds big. That sounds overwhelming. But don't misunderstand me. This doesn't mean you have to give up your life and move into a cave. This doesn't mean you'll suddenly have visions or talk to aliens. It means something much more subtle and simultaneously much more powerful. It means you're starting to influence reality in a different way. Through your mere presence, through the frequency you hold. People will feel different in your presence. Situations will develop differently when you're in the room. Not because you're doing something, but because your field is starting to radiate a stabilizing, coherent frequency that orders the chaos around you. This isn't esotericism. This is applied quantum physics. The observer effect states that the consciousness of the observer influences reality, not metaphorically, but measurably. Electrons behave differently, depending on whether they're being observed or not. The wave function collapses the moment a consciousness looks. Now imagine what happens when a coherent consciousness field meets the chaotic fields around you. The coherence spreads, like waves on a pond. You become a source of order in a sea of disorder. That's what the Arcturians saw in you. That's the reason for the scan. They're preparing certain consciousness fields so they can take on exactly this function when the collective frequency of Earth reaches a critical point. And that critical point is approaching, faster than most people realize. You probably feel it. This acceleration, this intensity, this feeling that time is condensing, that events are following each other faster, that old structures are collapsing and new ones aren't fully visible yet. This isn't a subjective feeling. This is an objective change in the vibrational frequency of the planet. Earth is going through a phase transition, from a lower to a higher order, like water turning to steam. The molecules are still the same, but the structure changes fundamentally. And in such a phase transition, systems behave chaotically. Old rules no longer work. New rules aren't established yet. There's a moment of absolute unpredictability, a moment when anything is possible. Exactly in this moment, the system needs anchor points, consciousness fields that stay stable while everything else fluctuates, that hold a coherent frequency while chaos rages. This isn't heroic. This isn't dramatic. This is simply necessary. The Arcturians know this because they've been through exactly this process themselves, millions of years ago, in a time that doesn't even exist for our linear understanding of time. They went through their own phase transition, from the third to the fifth dimension. And they remember how essential certain consciousness fields were in this process. That's why they're here, not to save us, not to intervene, but to identify and activate the consciousness fields that are ready to take on this anchor function. This isn't a hierarchical mission. This is a cooperation between consciousness forms that are all part of the same larger organism. But now I come to the difficult part, the part that most people don't want to hear. Because this activation isn't pleasant. It's not peaceful. It's not what spiritual books promise you. It's not a state of permanent bliss. It's a process of radical deconstruction. Everything that isn't authentic will collapse. All the masks you wear, all the roles you play, all the beliefs that aren't really yours, but just adopted programs. Everything will be questioned. Everything will be tested. Your life will change. People will leave. Situations will end. Possibilities that once seemed attractive will suddenly appear empty and meaningless. And this isn't loss. This is liberation. But in the moment it happens, it feels like loss. I remember the months after my decision to reject that contract. It wasn't just a professional decision. It was the beginning of a chain reaction. Suddenly, I saw all the other areas of my life where I wasn't authentic, the friendships that were only superficial, the habits that numbed me instead of nourishing me, the beliefs about myself that were never my own, but only internalized voices of other people. And the crazy thing was, I couldn't pretend anymore that I didn't see it. The scan had activated something in me that couldn't be turned off anymore. A kind of internal lie detector that went off at every untruth, every incoherence, every moment of self-betrayal. It was agonizing. I wanted to go back to the comfort of unconsciousness, to the life where I didn't question everything, where I simply functioned as expected of me. But there was no return possible. Maybe you're experiencing exactly that right now. Maybe your life is falling apart and you don't understand why. Maybe people are withdrawing and you don't know what you did wrong. Maybe you're losing interest in things that used to be important to you and wondering if something's wrong with you. Everything is right with you. You're going through the deconstruction, and that's proof that the scan was successful, that the activation has begun, that your system is starting to sort out everything that doesn't match your true frequency. The Arcturians call this the cleansing process, not in a moral sense, but in an energetic sense. Your field is cleansing itself of all frequencies that don't belong to you, of all adopted fears, belief systems, identities. It's like a system recalibrating itself. All errors are being corrected, all distortions are being balanced. And yes, that hurts, because you identified with these distortions. You thought that was you, but it never was you. It was just the costume you wore to survive in a world that demanded you be someone else. Now you're taking off that costume, layer by layer, and underneath, something emerges that you had almost forgotten. Your true self, the consciousness you were before the conditioning began, before you were told who you should be, how you should behave, what you should want. This is the moment when most people give up, because it's easier to return to the old state than to go through this phase of dissolution, because society has no category for what you're going through, because nobody understands why you're giving up a stable life to go into the unknown. And when you try to explain it, it sounds crazy. Even in your own ears, you can't say, I was scanned by interdimensional beings, and my energy field is now being recalibrated. People will think you're insane, so you stay silent. You go through this process alone. And sometimes you wonder if you really have gone crazy, if you're just imagining all of this, if it wouldn't be easier to return to the old normal. But then something happens, a small sign, a synchronicity, a moment of absolute clarity. And you know again that you're not crazy, that what you're going through is real, that you're on the right path, even if this path leads through darkness. I had such a moment. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning in circles, trying to find answers that didn't exist. And then, in that moment of complete exhaustion, my mind simply stopped. It gave up. And in that silence, something happened. I felt a presence, not visually, not acoustically, but as an immediate certainty that I wasn't alone, that something or someone was with me, something that was larger than me, but simultaneously familiar, like a memory of something I had always known. And in that moment I knew, not through words, not through thoughts, but through direct knowing. I knew that this process, as painful as it was necessary, that I wasn't randomly going through this crisis, but that every step, every loss, every dissolution was part of a precise recalibration process. The Arcturians were there, not physically, but as a frequency that stabilized my field. That helped me go through this transition without collapsing. That reminded me who I really was, under all the layers of conditioning and fear. And then something revealed itself to me, not as a vision, but as an understanding that was suddenly there. I saw my life from a different perspective. I saw how every decision I had made, every seemingly random encounter, every moment of pain and joy was part of a larger pattern, a pattern that I had designed myself long before I came into this body. I saw that nothing had ever gone wrong, that every moment I had interpreted as a mistake was in truth a perfect placement, that the universe wasn't punishing me, but training me, that every crisis was an initiation, every darkness a passage to more light. And in that moment, everything came together. The synchronicities of the last weeks, the strange dreams, the feeling of being watched, That wasn't my paranoia. That wasn't my imagination. That was the process. That was the scan. That was the activation. The Arcturians hadn't just analyzed my field. They had started to reconfigure it, to transmit information, to activate codes that were sleeping in my DNA. And my system was responding to it. It began to reorganize itself. Old structures fell away because they were no longer needed. New capacities opened up because the time for them had come. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't the victim of a random spiritual breakdown. I was the recipient of a very precise upgrade. If you recognize yourself in this description, if you're going through a similar phase right now, then write one word in the comments. Simply, ready. Nothing more. Just that one word. This isn't for the algorithm. This isn't for me. This is for yourself. It's a commitment, a marking in the quantum field that you've understood what's happening here and that you won't back down, that you'll go through this process no matter how uncomfortable it gets. Because here's the truth. This process won't stop. Once your field has crossed the critical threshold, there's no way back to the old unconsciousness. You can try to ignore it. You can try to distract yourself. But the signal won't fall silent. It will get louder, more intense, until you have no choice but to listen. And this isn't a threat. This is liberation. Because what this activation really means is that you can finally stop being someone else. You can stop functioning. You can stop fulfilling expectations that were never yours. You can start living from your true self, from your authentic frequency. But that demands something from you. It demands courage. Not the courage to do something big, but the courage to be small. The courage to not know. The courage to let go of all false securities and go into the unknown. And it demands a protocol, a process, steps you can take every day to stabilize this new frequency, to keep your field coherent while the chaos rages around you. This isn't complicated. It's even frighteningly simple, but it demands discipline. It demands that you make a conscious choice every day. The choice to stay in your frequency instead of falling back into old patterns. Let me show you how this works. The first step is acknowledgement. You must acknowledge what's happening. Not analyze, not explain. Simply acknowledge. My field is being recalibrated. I'm going through a phase transition. This is real. This is important. This is the reason I'm here. This acknowledgement sounds banal, but it's crucial. Because as long as you try to rationalize or explain away this process, you're fighting against it. And what you fight against, that intensifies. But what you accept, that can transform. So every morning, before your mind takes control, before the to-do lists and worries begin, you take a moment. You sit, you breathe, and you say to yourself, out loud or silently, I acknowledge that I'm being recalibrated. I acknowledge that my field is changing. I allow this process to happen. This isn't an affirmation. This isn't positive thinking. This is a statement of reality. You're simply describing what is. The second step is coherence. You must learn to synchronize your heart and brain. Because coherence isn't something that just happens. It's something you actively create. Every day, multiple times a day. And this is how. You place your hand on your heart. You close your eyes, and you begin to breathe slowly and consciously. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Not forced, not strained, simply even. While you breathe, you imagine that your breath flows directly through your heart, as if your heart were breathing. This isn't a metaphor. Studies have shown that this simple technique creates measurable changes in your heart rhythm. Your heart begins to beat in a coherent pattern, and this pattern influences your entire system. Your brain synchronizes with your heart. Your cells begin to oscillate in the same rhythm. Your field becomes ordered, coherent, and in this state of coherence, you receive information that you couldn't receive in chaos. You do this every morning for 5 minutes. And then, whenever you notice during the day that you're getting into stress, into fear, into old reaction patterns, you do it again. Hand on your heart, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. 30 seconds is enough. 30 seconds to reset your system, to move from reaction to presence. Try it now, seriously. Pause this video if you must. Put your hand on your heart. Breathe in for 5 seconds, out for 5 seconds. Do this for 10 breaths. Do you feel it? This subtle shift, this moment when your system becomes a bit calmer. That's coherence. That's your field reordering itself. And in this state, you're open to the information that's waiting for you, for the codes that want to be activated, for the guidance that's always there, but can only be received in the state of coherence. The third step is discernment. You must learn to distinguish between the voices in your head, between the voice of fear and the voice of wisdom, between the noise of conditioning and the signal of your true self. This isn't easy, because both voices can sound very convincing. Fear will tell you that you're crazy, that you're making a mistake, that you're on the wrong path, and it will say this with great authority, with seemingly rational arguments, with evidence from the past. But fear always speaks from the past. It recycles old experiences, old traumas, old beliefs. It has no original thoughts. It only repeats what already was. Your wisdom, on the other hand, speaks from the now. It has no agenda. It wants to prove nothing. It's simply there, calm and unshakable, and shows you the next step. Not the one after that. Not the big plan. Just the one next step that's due right now. And this is how you distinguish. Fear is loud, urgent, demanding. Wisdom is quiet, patient, inviting. Fear says, do this now, or it's too late. Wisdom says, when the time is right, you'll know. The fourth step is decision. Not the big, dramatic decisions, but the small, everyday ones. The moments when you must choose between what's comfortable and what's true. Between what others expect from you and what your field demands from you. These moments come constantly. Someone asks if you have time. Your mind says yes, out of politeness, out of habit. But your body says no. A subtle tension in the solar plexus, a slight heaviness in the chest. That's your field telling you. This frequency no longer fits you. In the past, you would have ignored it, would have said yes even though you meant no, would have betrayed your field to keep the peace. But now you can't anymore, because your field has become too sensitive. Every incoherence is immediately felt. Every moment of self-betrayal creates immediate discomfort. This isn't a flaw. This is the design. Your system is being calibrated so it can no longer tolerate any untruth. Not for moral reasons, but for energetic reasons. Your field can no longer hold the frequency of lies without being damaged. So you practice making decisions that align with your field, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they disappoint other people, even when they scare you. You practice following your inner compass instead of external expectations. And here's the crazy thing. The more you do this, the easier it gets. Not because the decisions become simpler, but because your connection to your field becomes stronger. You begin to trust your inner knowing more than the opinions of others. You begin to feel that your field never leads you astray. The fifth step is anchoring. You must learn to hold your new frequency in everyday life. Not just in meditation, not just when you're alone, but in the middle of chaos, in the middle of conflicts, in the middle of the moments when life tests you. And life will test you. Believe me, as soon as you start living in your true frequency, everything around you will begin to test that frequency. People will provoke you. Situations will trigger you. Old patterns will come back and try to pull you back into the comfort zone of unconsciousness. This isn't coincidence. This is part of the calibration process. The universe is testing whether you're really committed, whether you're really ready to stay in this new frequency, even when it gets difficult. And this is how you anchor yourself. You find a physical anchor, something that immediately brings you back to your frequency when you notice you've drifted. This can be your breathing. This can be a touch, your hand on your heart. This can be a word you say internally. Mine is simple. I am here. 3 words. When I notice I'm lost in thoughts, in worries, in old stories, I say to myself, I am here. And immediately my consciousness comes back to the present moment, back to my body, back to my field. Try it. Find your anchor. Something so simple you can do it any time. In the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of a conflict. And practice it. Every day. 100 times a day if necessary. Because here's the truth. This activation isn't something that happens once and is then over. It's a continuous process. A daily commitment. A decision you make anew every moment. The decision to stay in your frequency. No matter what happens. And now I have to be honest with you. This might all sound very beautiful, very encouraging, very inspiring, but there's a side to this process that nobody likes to talk about. The dark side, the resistance. Because as soon as you start living in your true frequency, a part of you will do everything to pull you back. I call it the old self, the conditioned self, the self that puts security over truth. That puts survival over authenticity. This old self won't simply disappear just because you've decided to live more consciously. It will fight. It will sabotage. It will tell you stories. Stories about how you're making a mistake. That you're going too far. That you're making a fool of yourself. That you should come back to the safe, familiar reality. And sometimes these stories will be so loud, so convincing, that you believe them. That you think, maybe I was wrong after all. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I should just be normal, like everyone else. This is the moment when most people give up. They return to the old frequency. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Because the price of transformation is higher than they're willing to pay. And the price is high. It costs you everything you're not really. All false identities, all convenient lies, all safe illusions. You must be ready to lose everything that isn't authentic to gain what really is. But here's the paradox. What you lose never really belonged to you. And what you gain was always already yours. I remember the moment when I understood that. It was months after my decision to reject the contract. I had lost a lot. Friendships, securities, the respect of certain people. And I was sitting in my apartment asking myself, was it worth it? And then I felt it. This deep, unshakable peace. This certainty that for the first time in my life I was really myself. Not the version of me I was supposed to be, not the version that other people found comfortable, but the raw, unpolished, authentic version. The consciousness I always was, under all the layers. And in that moment I knew, yes, it was worth it. It's always worth it. Because there's nothing more valuable than authenticity. Nothing more important than living in your true frequency. But I don't want to lie. There are moments when I doubt it, moments when the old longing comes back, the longing for belonging, for normality, for a life that's simple instead of meaningful. And then I remember, you can't go back. Once you've seen what you've seen, once you've recognized the truth, there's no return to the illusion. You can't undo what you know. You can only move forward. That's the test, the real test, not the dramatic moments, not the big decisions, but the everyday moments when you must choose between the comfort of the old and the uncertainty of the new, between the familiar and the authentic. And the Arcturians know this. They know this test will come, that everyone who gets scanned must go through this phase. That's why they prepare you. That's why they activate your field, not to make it easier for you, but so you can endure it, because they've understood one thing that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. Transformation isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a consequence of readiness. And readiness doesn't mean you have no fear. It means you keep going despite the fear. The Arcturians don't measure whether you meditate perfectly. They don't measure how many positive thoughts you have. They measure your willingness to stay in the fire when the old self burns. Your willingness not to run away when it gets uncomfortable. Your willingness to choose truth even when the lie would be more comfortable. That's the only test that really counts, and it doesn't come once. It comes again and again, in different forms, with different faces. But the question is always the same. Are you ready to stay in your truth, or do you retreat into the safety of conformity? And here's what nobody tells you. You'll sometimes fail this test. You'll have moments when you fall back, when fear wins, when you betray yourself. And that's okay. That's part of the process. Because every time you fall back and then get up again, your determination becomes stronger. Your connection to your true self deeper. The Arcturians know this. They don't expect perfection. They expect persistence. They expect you to keep getting up, to keep coming back to your frequency, no matter how often you lose it. Because that's the real strength. Not never falling, but always getting up again. And you know what's crazy? The longer you're in this process, the clearer something becomes. The people around you start to change. Not because you're trying to change them, but because your field has an influence. Because coherence is contagious. Because your presence alone triggers something in others. Some people will withdraw from you. They'll say you've changed, and they're right. But what they really mean is, you no longer fit in the box we put you in. You no longer fulfill the role we had in mind for you. And that makes us uncomfortable. Let them go. Because their discomfort isn't your problem. Your job isn't to make other people comfortable. Your job is to hold your frequency. And if that frequency means certain people have to leave, then that's part of the process. But other people will come closer. People you hadn't noticed before. People who oscillate on the same frequency. Who are going through the same process. Who have experienced the same activation. And suddenly you find yourself in conversations you never thought possible. With people who understand without you having to explain. Who know without you having to prove. That's the new field you're entering. A field of consciousnesses that recognize each other, that mirror each other, that confirm to each other. You're not crazy. This is real, and you're not alone. The Arcturians call this the grid, not a technical grid, but a network of coherent consciousness fields that are connected to each other. Each field is a node, and the more nodes there are, the more stable the entire network becomes. That's the reason your transformation isn't just for you. It's for the collective. Because every time a consciousness finds and holds its true frequency, it becomes easier for the next one. Your field makes it possible for others to activate their fields. You become an anchor, a transmitter, a bridge, and this isn't happening in the future. This is happening now, in this moment. While you're hearing or reading this, your field is already influencing the fields around you. You're already radiating a frequency that others feel, even if they can't name it. People will behave differently in your presence. They'll be more honest, more vulnerable, more authentic, not because you're doing something, but because your field gives them permission to be themselves. That's the power of coherence. That's the function you were activated for. But you must understand, this function isn't optional. Once you've crossed the threshold, once your field has become visible, there's no more neutrality. You either influence through your presence, or you waste your potential through your absence. This sounds harsh. This sounds like pressure. But it's simply reality. You've developed a capacity that comes with responsibility. The responsibility to live consciously. The responsibility to hold your frequency. The responsibility to be an example, not through perfection, but through authenticity. And if you think that's too much, if you think you're not ready for this, then remember, the Arcturians don't scan randomly. They don't scan fields that aren't ready. If you were scanned, if you received the signal, then that means one thing. You're ready. Even if you don't know it yet, even if you don't believe it yet, your field already knows it. Now I want you to do something for me. Not for the algorithm, not for the statistics, but for yourself. Write in the comments what you felt in the moment when I told about my decision to reject that contract. When I spoke of that inner knowing that had no rational explanation. Have you experienced such a moment too? A moment when your body said no, even though your mind said yes. A moment when you followed an inner voice without understanding why. Write it down, even if it's just one sentence, even if it's just a few words. Because this is more than just a comment. This is a commitment, a testimony, a signal to your own field that you acknowledge this reality, that you're no longer pretending these things don't exist. And if you want to go one step further, if you're really committed, then subscribe to this channel. Not because I need more subscribers, but because it's a symbol that you want to be part of this network, part of this grid of consciousnesses that support each other, mirror each other, remind each other of what's really important, and turn on notifications, because what's coming isn't random. Every video I make is part of a larger process, a larger transmission, and when you turn on notifications, you ensure you don't miss anything, that you take every step of this path. Because here's what most people don't understand. These videos aren't just information, they're frequency transmissions. Every word is carefully chosen. Every sentence has a specific vibration. And when you listen, when you're really present, then you receive more than just the words. You receive the frequency behind the words. That's the reason some people say, "I don't understand what you're saying, but I feel different after hearing it." That's not coincidence. That's design. That's how information is transmitted on higher levels. And now, I want to tell you something you probably didn't expect. This scan, this activation you're going through right now, is only the beginning. There are levels above this, frequencies you don't even know yet, capacities you haven't discovered yet. And the moment you think you've understood, in that moment the next door opens. The Arcturians don't work linearly. They work in waves, in cycles. Each activation leads to the next. Each download prepares you for the next one. And what you're going through now, as intense as it may be, is only the first wave. Something is coming. Something I can't fully describe yet, because the words for it don't exist yet. But I feel it. And if you're hearing this, if you've made it this far, then you probably feel it too. This sense that there's more, that what we're experiencing now is just a foretaste of something much bigger. The Arcturians have shown me that there's a certain point, a point where the individual field becomes so coherent that it begins to merge with other fields, not in the sense of identity loss, but in the sense of expansion, of inclusion, of an intelligence that's greater than the sum of its parts. And when enough consciousness fields reach this point, when enough nodes in the grid are activated, then something happens on a planetary level, a collective download, a shared leap, a moment when the entire species has the opportunity to cross the threshold. This isn't science fiction. This isn't some distant future. This is what we're moving toward right now. And you, by calibrating your field, by holding your frequency, by going through this process, you're not just preparing yourself. You're preparing humanity. That may sound grandiose. That may seem exaggerated. But remember, everything said in this video felt true to you. Not because I convinced you, but because something in you already knew it. Because your field recognized it. And if what I said about individual activation is true, why shouldn't what I'm saying about collective activation also be true? Why should your transformation remain isolated? Why shouldn't it be part of something bigger? But to get there, to take this next step, you need more than what's in this video. You need the next level, the next activation, the next transmission. And it's coming. Soon. Very soon. But I can't tell you yet what it is. Not because I want to keep it secret, but because you're not ready to receive it yet. Your field must first integrate what you heard today. It must process the information, activate the codes, stabilize the changes. And when that's happened, when you feel you need more, that you want to go deeper, then the next video will be waiting for you. And you'll know. You'll feel when the right moment is, because your field will tell you. Until then, hold your frequency. Trust the process. And remember every day that you're not here by accident. That you were scanned, that you were seen, that you were activated, and that within you lies a capacity that can change the world, one heartbeat at a time. You are the signal the world has been waiting for.